Ever since I left the Navy SEALs to tread the murky waters of mercenary gigs, I've seen my share of shady deals and covert operations. But nothing quite compared to the job offer that landed in my lap one gloomy Wednesday afternoon: security work on a secretive island in the Pacific. The pay was good, too good to pass up, considering the vague details. So I took it. The journey to the island was shrouded in an unsettling mist as the boat sliced through the choppy waters. I leaned on the railing, watching the horizon swallowed by fog, with a churn in my gut that wasn't from the waves. I was used to danger, but the secrecy surrounding this job knotted my nerves tighter than usual. As we docked, the sight that greeted me wasn't reassuring. Dominating the landscape was a colossal black Victorian mansion, its architecture more akin to a fortress than a home, with blade-like turrets cutting into the overcast sky. It had no windows that I could see, which did nothing to ease the sense of dread settling in my bones. I was met by Alex Mercer, the head of security. His arms, heavily tattooed with symbols I couldn't quite make sense of, extended for a firm handshake. "Ethan, glad you could make it. This is going to be an interesting week," he said, his voice carrying an edge of irony that didn't escape me. As we walked towards the main building, I noticed more unsettling details: that enigmatic logo of a stick figure with spidery arms painted here and there, on flags and banners fluttering against the grim skies. It gave off a cultish vibe that made me question the real agenda of this gathering. The other members of the security team were a mixed bag. Sven, a towering Scandinavian with a stoic face, gave me a curt nod. "Stick close and watch your back," he muttered under his breath as we checked our gear. The others didn't say much, their expressions tight, eyes darting around nervously. Our briefing was terse. Alex outlined the week's schedule, heavy on confidentiality and light on specifics. "You'll be assigned to patrol the perimeter during the events. No one in or out without clearance. And keep your eyes open. We're not expecting trouble, but you never know," Alex explained, his gaze steady on mine. That night, as I lay in a stark room within the mansion's east wing, the isolation of our location truly hit me. Outside, the wind howled like a banshee over the sea, a sound occasionally punctuated by the distant crashing of waves against rocks. Sleep was fitful. The unease about the upcoming events twisted my dreams into nightmares. I woke with the dawn, a sense of foreboding hanging over me as heavy as the sea fog. Today, the ritual would begin, and whatever that entailed, I knew it wouldn't be anything I could have prepared for in my previous life as a SEAL. I readied myself, checking my equipment and securing my firearm. Whatever this job would throw at me, I was ready. Or so I thought. The morning's gray dawn brought no relief to my unsettled mind. As the island woke under a cloak of fog, the mansion buzzed with secretive activity. Security was tight, with every guard, including myself, placed on high alert. We were given earpieces and instructed to keep communication lines open at all times. It felt like the calm before a storm, an uneasy silence hanging over us as we prepared for the day's events. Our primary duty was to secure the perimeter for the ritual. The guests began to arrive in black SUVs, their windows tinted darker than the storm clouds above. Men and women stepped out, some with faces I recognized from magazine covers and television screens. Politicians, magnates, celebrities, all here for reasons I couldn't begin to fathom. As they moved towards the mansion's grand entrance, their expressions were somber, their eyes avoiding the light as if they were part of a somber procession rather than a gathering of the elite. Alex and I watched from a distance, our discussion minimal but our skepticism mutual. "Remember, eyes and ears open, Ethan. No heroics," Alex reminded me, his gaze scanning the crowd for any signs of trouble. I was stationed at a vantage point that gave me a broad view of the mansion's front and the coastal edge of the island. From here, I could see the eerie logos that marked the pathway leading up to the entrance, those spidery figures seeming to watch over the guests as they entered the mansion. The ritual began in the late afternoon. The sky had turned a darker shade of gray, and as I patrolled near the ceremonial area, the air grew thick with a sense of anticipation. Chants, low and rhythmic, started to echo from the mansion's depths, unsettling yet mesmerizing. The guests, now robed in dark cloaks, formed a circle in what looked like a specially prepared room, visible through an open side door. My job kept me outside, but the bits and pieces I caught were enough to send shivers down my spine. The atmosphere was charged, almost electric, as if the air itself was bracing for something unnatural. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were dabbling in matters far beyond the usual scope of a security detail. During one of my rounds, I passed close to the ceremonial room. Through the gap in the door, I saw a figure at the center of the room, arms raised, speaking words I couldn't understand. The figure was draped in red, a stark contrast to the others, and as the chanting grew louder, the tension in my chest tightened. As dusk fell, the ritual seemed to reach its peak. A silence fell abruptly, so deep it felt like the world had stopped breathing. Then, a scream shattered the stillness, primal and terrified. It cut through me, stopping me dead in my tracks. I reached for my radio, about to call it in. But Alex's voice came through first, stern and urgent. "All units, stay sharp. It's begun." That night, my conflict was not just professional, but deeply personal. What were we guarding? What were these people here to witness or partake in? My thoughts were a whirlwind of doubt and fear, far from the straightforward security missions I was used to. Every shadow seemed darker, every whisper of the wind a warning. As I settled back to my post, the weight of the unknown loomed over me. I was here to do a job, but the moral lines were blurring. Under the cloak of night, with the ocean roaring in the distance, I realized this was no ordinary assignment. This was something else entirely. Something that might just be beyond my control. The night air was charged with a palpable tension that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. After the eerie silence and sudden scream that had echoed through the ceremonial room, the atmosphere had shifted. The guests, once just an unsettling presence, now seemed part of something far more sinister. I was stationed just outside the main hall, my eyes scanning the area while my mind raced with unanswered questions. The air was thick with a heavy, metallic scent, and the ground felt like it could open beneath me at any moment. It was during these tense moments that the first of the night's horrors was unleashed. Without warning, the ground inside the ceremonial room began to rumble, a low growl that quickly escalated into a deafening roar. As I peered through the doorway, I saw the circle of robed figures step back as the center of the room cracked open. From the fissure, a form emerged, a creature that seemed ripped from the bowels of hell itself. Moloch, the demonic entity, stood towering, its body a grotesque mix of man and bull, with curving horns and eyes that burned like fire. The guests recoiled in horror, but their retreat was cut short as Moloch moved with terrifying speed. Its first act was brutal, grabbing a nearby attendee who was too slow to escape. The sounds of the man's screams mingled with the snapping of bones, creating the symphony of nightmares that would haunt me for nights to come. Sven and I were quick to react, pulling our weapons and aiming at the creature, though our training had never prepared us for this. "What the hell do we do?" Sven shouted over the chaos, his voice laced with fear and confusion. "Keep your distance and aim for the head." I yelled back, unsure if bullets would even harm such a creature. As we fired, Moloch turned its fiery gaze towards us. The bullets seemed to slow it, but not enough. With a roar that shook the foundations of the mansion, it charged. The ensuing melee was chaos incarnate. Moloch rampaged through the room, attacking indiscriminately as we tried to lead the guests to safety. Amid the chaos, I lost sight of Sven, only to see him moments later, thrown across the room like a ragdoll by Moloch's mighty arm. He hit the wall with a sickening crack and did not rise again. The loss of Sven hit me like a punch to the gut. He was more than a colleague. In the short time we worked together, he'd become a friend. But there was no time to mourn. Survival was the only thing that mattered now. As I ducked behind a shattered pillar, reloading my weapon, I caught sight of the ocean through the broken windows. What I saw next defied all belief. A massive, shadowy form was rising from the waves. The behemoth, a multi-headed dragon-like creature, loomed over the island, its eyes glowing with the same unholy light as Moloch's. The creature's arrival turned the night into an apocalyptic vision, a scene straight out of Revelation. The guests screamed and scrambled, tripping over each other in their desperate attempts to escape the mansion. Over the comms, Alex's voice was frantic, ordering a full retreat. I made my way through the debris and carnage, each step a nightmare. My mind raced with the images of the night, the demonic Moloch, the fallen Sten, and now the behemoth adding to the chaos. It was clear this job was no ordinary security gig. It was a descent into madness, and survival now depended on escaping the horror I had unwittingly stepped into. The night had turned into a spectacle of horror that no training could have prepared me for. As Behemoth rose from the ocean, its massive form casting a shadow over the island, the sense of dread deepened. The creature, with its multiple heads and glowing eyes, seemed to challenge the very sanity of all who beheld it. I found myself momentarily frozen, staring in disbelief at the monstrous dragon-like creature that now loomed before us. Its heads, each a grotesque mirror of the others, snaked forward, eyes fixed on the chaos at the mansion. The roars that erupted from its many throats were deafening, blending with the screams of the fleeing guests. As Behemoth's massive tails swept across the beach, demolishing anything in their path, the realization hit me. This was no mere security job. We were pawns in a nightmarish scenario, far beyond the realm of any human understanding or control. My survival instincts kicked in, overriding the shock as I shouted for the others to move away from the windows and seek cover. Moloch, meanwhile, continued its rampage within the mansion. The clash between the demonic bull and the dragon-like creature was inevitable. As Moloch charged towards the new threat, the ground trembled under the weight of their collision. The impact was like a thunderclap, shaking the foundation of the mansion and sending shards of glass and debris flying. Amid the chaos, Alex's voice crackled through the earpiece, trying to coordinate a defense. But what defense could there be against such monsters? Fall back, he finally ordered, the strain evident in his voice. Regroup at the west wing. We need to contain this, somehow. I made my way through the destroyed hallways, stepping over rubble and the unfortunate who hadn't made it out. The mansion, once imposing and solid, now felt like a crumbling cage. Each step brought a new wave of danger as parts of the ceiling caved in, nearly missing me by inches. As I reached the designated regrouping spot, the sight that greeted me was grim. A handful of security personnel, including Alex, were gathered, each one bearing the marks of the night's terror. We can't fight these things, I said, meeting Alex's eyes. We need to get everyone off this island. Alex nodded, his face set in a hard line. I know, Ethan. I've called for extraction. Helicopters on the way, but it won't land with these creatures battling it out. We need to draw them away from the landing zone. Strategizing quickly, we formulated a plan. Using flares and remaining ammunition, we would attempt to distract the creatures, driving them towards the far side of the island. It was a desperate plan, but it was all we had. With heavy hearts and hands steadied by determination, we set out to execute our plan. Each flare we fired into the night sky drew the attention of Behemoth, its heads turning towards the bright lights. Meanwhile, Moloch seemed to respond to the noise of our gunfire. Its attention momentarily diverted from its colossal foe. As we worked to lure the creatures away, the sound of chopper blades grew louder, an audacious signal of hope amidst the nightmare. Our plan was working, but the window of escape was narrow. We had to move fast, running towards the landing zone. I couldn't help but glance back at the battling titans, their forms outlined against the burning mansion. The island was no longer just a secretive enclave. It had become a battleground of mythic horrors. The only thought that spurred me on was the desperate need to escape, to leave this cursed place behind, hoping never to witness anything like it again. The chaos seemed to climax as we sprinted towards the designated extraction point. The monstrous cries of Behemoth and the thunderous clashes with Moloch provided a terrifying soundtrack to our escape. Amid the pandemonium, a figure appeared before me, distinct against the backdrop of chaos. It was the Guardian, his scared face and formidable presence cutting through the turmoil. "Follow me," he bellowed, his voice somehow rising above the cacophony. His command was not up for debate. There was an authority in his tone that demanded obedience. With no better plan and the creatures distracted, I followed him, ducking through a less traveled path that led away from the main battleground. As we maneuvered through thick brush, the Guardian spoke without looking back. This island was never just about the rich seeking thrills or the powerful dabbling in the dark arts. It was a lock to a door that should have remained closed. His words were cryptic, but the gravity in them was unmistakable. Reaching a secluded alcove, shielded by dense trees, the Guardian stopped and faced me, his eyes searching mine. What was summoned here tonight was not meant to walk this earth. Both Moloch and Behemoth are just the beginning. They guard something far worse, something that cannot be allowed to emerge. I processed his words, trying to match them with everything I had witnessed. Why help me? Why not just let me run into the fray like everyone else? I asked, the suspicion hard to keep out of my voice. He smiled, a grim twist of his lips. "Because you're different, Ethan. You've seen battlefields and walked through hell, yet you haven't lost your humanity. You question, you doubt, and that makes you valuable." He turned, pointing towards a distant part of the island where a faint light signaled the approaching helicopter. "We need to get you out of here, to ensure the world knows what can happen when the greed of the few risks the lives of the many. I will provide a distraction, draw them away. You must make it to the helicopter." His plan sounded like a suicide mission for him, but his resolve was clear. "How can I trust you?" I asked, the weight of the entire night pressing down on me. "You don't have to trust me, but trust in your duty to protect others from this nightmare," he replied, his gaze steady and unflinching. With a heavy heart, I nodded, understanding the role I had to play. As the Guardian moved off to enact his part of the plan, I made my way towards the clearing where the helicopter's lights began to pierce the dark sky. The ground shook as I ran, the sounds of battle echoing through the trees. Every step was fraught with danger, but the sight of the helicopter descending through a haze of smoke and ash spurred me on. The pilot waved frantically, urging me to hurry. As I approached the landing zone, a loud crash behind me signaled the Guardian's engagement with the creatures. It was a diversion that bought me precious seconds. I leaped aboard the helicopter, not daring to look back as we lifted off. Ascending into the night sky, the island below reduced to a speck amidst the vast ocean, I couldn't shake the feeling of ominous weight. The Guardian's last look, a mix of determination and sorrow, remained etched in my mind. We were escaping, but at what cost? And what would follow from the horrors unleashed tonight? These questions haunted me as the island faded into darkness, a stark reminder of the thin line between control and cataclysm. The helicopter's blades beat against the night, each thud sensing with the pounding of my heart as we ascended away from the nightmare below. The pilot, a seasoned veteran who'd flown in more war zones than he cared to count, kept his eyes fixed on the horizon. "Strap in tight," he shouted over the noise. "We're not clear of this mess yet." As we gained altitude, the sight of the island receded into a patchwork of fire and darkness. Below, the battle between Moloch and Behemoth raged on, their forms occasionally illuminated by the flickering flames that now consumed the mansion. It was like watching a myth come to life, a story of titans warring in the ancient world, only it was horrifyingly real. The Guardian's plan had worked, giving me the chance to escape, but the cost of it gnawed at me. His last look, one of resigned fate, haunted me. I wondered if he had survived, if he was ever meant to. His words about the dangers still locked away on that island echoed in my mind, a chilling promise of more horrors to come. Turning to the pilot, I asked for the radio. "I need to report this," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. I detailed everything to my contact, from the unspeakable creatures to the sacrificial horrors and the Guardian's sacrifice. The silence that followed my report was heavy, filled with the weight of disbelief and the dread of what might follow. "We need to warn them. They have to send help," I insisted, knowing full well the kind of chaos that could ensue if the situation on the island wasn't contained. The pilot nodded, his face grim as he relayed our coordinates and the situation to his superiors. As we flew towards the mainland, the adrenaline that had fueled my survival began to ebb, replaced by an overwhelming exhaustion. My body ached from the night's exertions, and my mind reeled from the shock of what I had witnessed. It was impossible to reconcile the existence of such nightmares with the world I thought I knew. Looking out the window, I watched the dawn break over the ocean. The first light of day seemed incongruous with the darkness of the previous night's events. How could the world just carry on when such evil had been unleashed? How many were still trapped on the island, their fate unknown? The helicopter landed on a military base just as the sun rose fully above the horizon. I was met by a flurry of activity. Armed guards, medical personnel, and government officials, all thrown into a state of urgent action by the news we brought. As I was led away for debriefing, my thoughts remained with the island. The creatures, the Guardian, the people who had no idea of the horror they were stepping into when they arrived. My report would spark investigations, maybe even retaliatory actions, but the scars of what I had seen and the secrets the island still held were mine to carry. The reality of my escape was bittersweet. Relief at my survival was tainted by the knowledge of those left behind and the fear of what might yet come from that cursed place. The world remained unaware of the depth of darkness that lurked on that remote island, and as I walked into the debriefing room, I knew my fight was far from over. My story, this unbelievable testimony, was just beginning. Sitting in the debriefing room, the harsh fluorescent lights seemed to pale in comparison to the vivid horrors I had witnessed. Across from me, officials from various agencies scribbled notes as I recounted the events, their expressions a mix of skepticism and concealed fear. I knew how it sounded, like the ramblings of a man unhinged by too much time in the field. But every word was the truth, no matter how unbelievable it seemed. I assure you, everything I've reported happened just as I described. You need to send a team to the island, secure whatever's left, and make sure nothing else comes out of there, I urge, my voice firm with the weight of urgency. The officials exchanged glances, their doubts palpable, but the gravity of my account was undeniable. After hours of questions and repeated accounts, I was finally allowed to leave the confines of the military base. Stepping outside, the reality of the normal world seemed surreal. People went about their lives, oblivious to the dark threats lurking miles away on a hidden island. I wondered how many other places like that existed, secrets buried away from the public eye. The ride home gave me too much time to think. The images of Moloch and Behemoth, the sounds of their roars, and the screams of the victims replayed in my mind. I felt a profound isolation, a barrier between me and the rest of humanity who had not seen such terrors. Arriving home, the familiarity of my own space did little to ease the restlessness in my soul. I was safe, but at what cost? How many had died? What had become of the Guardian? The questions swirled in my mind, each one a reminder of the unresolved issues I had left behind. I tried to resume a normal routine in the days that followed, but the shadows of what I had experienced were never far away. Nightmares haunted my sleep, vivid reenactments of the horrors on the island. I knew I couldn't keep this burden to myself. The world needed to be warned, to be prepared for the possibility of such evils emerging again. The decision to write down my experiences came from a need to make sense of them, to warn others. As I started documenting everything, the process was cathartic but painful. Each word revived the memories, etching them deeper into my consciousness. As the story spread, interest and speculation grew. Some branded it a conspiracy, others a stark warning about dabbling in forces beyond human control. But all agreed something had to be done. The government launched a covert investigation, the results of which remained classified. Rumors of strange findings and mysterious disappearances of key personnel involved in the initial explorations circulated in whispers. Months later, as I sat by my window, looking out at a peaceful street, the contrast between my current reality and the nightmares I had lived was stark. The world remained largely unaware and unprepared for the kinds of horrors I knew existed. But I had done what I could. I had told my story. My gaze drifted to the horizon, where the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the ground. In those shadows, I saw the silhouettes of Moloch and Behemoth, reminders of the darkness that lingered just out of sight. I knew my fight wasn't over. Perhaps it was just beginning. The island was out there, its secrets buried but not contained, a silent threat waiting for the unwary to unlock its horrors once again.